Those of you who may not know me or haven't seen me before, I'm Ed Ames. Some of you may remember me from earlier days and other scenes from my show business background. Still having problems?
No, but
can you hear me now?
yeah.
I don't know, I'm beginning to feel, well, I'm not going to say it. Anyways, it's a little obscene here, but I'll try to, and for those who follow me, be aware that you may have trouble being heard, so I'm going to speak a little louder, I'm going to speak a little closer, and hopefully by now you can hear me. Can you?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, some of you may remember from, my show business career, which is a whole other part of my life. But what some of you may not know is that I'm also a very strong Jewish activist, and I'm the president of the West Coast ZOA, and I'm here to make an introduction to you. Before I do, I have to make a comment. As I drove down from Santa Barbara to come here, and between Santa Barbara and here, it was like an inferno, as you all know. And it reminded me of something. There was a song that was written by a Jewish activist pre-Holocaust days in Europe. And he went around, this gentleman went all around the Eastern Europe begging the people to wake up, warning them about an imminent disaster. And he wrote a song, and the song was called Es brennt. It's burning. My fellow Jews, our community is burning. Very few people listened to him, and we all know what happened. He was what you might have called a Paul Revere of his time. Well, now we have a Paul Revere of our own in this part of the world, and it is going to be my pleasure to introduce her to you now. Her name is Doris Montrose, and those of you who haven't heard of her yet will be hearing a lot about her now. She has been and I'm going to have to look at this because I can never remember the title. She has been the founder and the spark plug and the organizer and the activist of the Children of Jewish Holocaust Survivors. That is an organization that she created single-handedly, and with the help of just a few friends has been doing wonderful things. She's been bringing people into the area. She's been having showing films. She's been having affairs that she's held under the auspices of the Children of Holocaust Survivors, which is her organization, and which she will continue to work in and to do good things. So along with that, she has just been selected as the new director of the West Coast ZOA. So she is our new leader. Her name is Doris Montrose, as I said, and she, I think, is going to do big things. I'm looking forward to working with her and having wonderful things happen. And so without any further ado, I would like you to meet our new director of the ZOA and head of the Jewish Children's Holocaust Survivors. And I might mention she herself, of course, is a Holocaust survivor, the daughter of Holocaust survivors, Doris Montrose. Doris?
And I did not pay him to say that. Thank you, Ed. Your support of Israel and your leadership within the Jewish community is extraordinary and greatly appreciated. We desperately need more wonderful people such as you. Thank you for making such an important difference. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this afternoon for what promises to be an enlightening and perhaps disturbing afternoon. Bottom line, Israel is in harm's way, and it's critically important to the future of all Jews that we stand up together and fight for our rights. Today's program is part of an ongoing information series. We will continue to offer more such forums in order to spread the word of Israel's plight. We sincerely hope you and your friends will support our efforts to bring about the necessary changes for a peaceful Middle East, where Jews can flourish in their own country and as safe citizens of the world. To deal with this monumental task, we must first minimize the incredible threats that face us on many fronts. Clearly, Iran and its potential nuclear capabilities are one of our most crucial priorities. Lebanon and Syria are pressing Israel's borders every day. World opinion is being poisoned against us from many sources, and a major anti-Israel shift is building in Washington and even in Jerusalem that comforts our enemies and hampers our ability to succeed in our goals. In years past, Israel has stopped Iraq and more recently Syria, but how long can Israel stand alone against an increasingly hostile world? Our speaker this afternoon, Yaakov Katz, is an expert on the Middle East and will provide valuable insights into the social and political nature of the present crisis confronting Israel. He will also discuss his views on how the new White House and U.S. Congress will help or could imperil the state of Israel, and he'll look at the real, growing threats by Israel's enemies in the Middle East. Yaakov is a military correspondent and defense analyst for the Jerusalem Post, the leading English newspaper. He reports daily on the sobering first-hand accounts of Israel's struggle for survival, particularly in the volatile West Bank and Gaza Strip. Originally from Chicago, Yaakov has lived in Israel the past 15 years. In addition to his duties at the Jerusalem Post, he is the Israel correspondent for a number of publications, including USA Today and the London-based Jewish Chronicle. A question and answer period will follow Mr. Katz's presentation. At this time, we ask that everyone turn off their cell phones and pagers. And please welcome Yaakov Katz.
Thank you all very much. Am I heard? Okay. I think we have to thank the hotel for this wonderful background music that goes along just beautifully, fits into the talk. You know, talking about Israeli security in the Middle East, we couldn't have asked for better music to accompany when discussing such issues. Yeah, I heard the Farsi out there before. It is said that you can tell a lot about a person by the company they keep. And in the case of Hezbollah arch-terrorist Imad Mornia, I would say that is undeniably the case. Until he was killed this past February in a Damascus car bombing, Imad Mornia was one of the most wanted terrorists in the world today, held responsible for the most deaths of Americans from World War II and until 9/11. He, in his short life of 45 years, Mornia personified what can be described, I would say, as a nexus of terrorism encompassing the entire Middle East and linking between Iran, Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. He was on the FBI's most wanted list for his involvement in the 1983 bombings of the U.S. Marine Barracks and Embassy in Beirut, attacks that killed over 300, as well as the 1985 hijacking of a TWA airliner. Israel wanted him for his direct involvement in the 1994 bombing of the Buenos Aires Jewish Community Center, an attack that killed over 80, as well as for his involvement in a bombing 2 years earlier in the same city on the Israeli embassy, an attack that killed over 20. And he was believed to have masterminded the abduction on July 12, 2006 of Israeli reservists Eldad Regev and Ehud Goldwasser, whose bodies were returned to Israel in a painful prisoner swap this past July, an attack that sparked what has become known as the Second Lebanon War. So he was wanted by Argentina, France, Israel, the United States, and other countries around the world. And it was in February when he met his demise in a meticulously planned car bombing in the heart of Damascus, shortly after finishing up a meeting with Iranian officials in the nearby Iranian embassy. Some reports claim that the bomb was actually planted in the headrest of his Mitsubishi Jeep. Now, fingers immediately pointed to the Mossad, the Israeli equivalent of the CIA, as being responsible and behind the assassination. But what Mornia's illustrious career demonstrates is that the world of terror is not just small, but it's even intimate. Imad Mornia was the commander-in-chief of Hezbollah military forces. Iran is the known financer of Hezbollah, and Syria is the known supplier of weapons to Hezbollah. And there's at least one documented meeting between Imad Mornia and Osama bin Laden in the early 1990s in Africa. So while one could view his death as just another incident, another event that takes place in the larger spectrum of incidents and events and things that happen in the Middle East, I would argue that it is part of a larger strategic war that Israel today is waging. Israel and other countries in the West are waging against what some might describe as an axis of evil that originates in Iran, continues on to Syria, on to Lebanon, and then to the Palestinian territories. His assassination also joins another monumental event, possibly one of the greatest and most daring events of this past year. I'm referring to last September 6, 2007, the Israeli airstrike on what is known now to have been a Syrian nuclear reactor. 8 Israeli F-15s carrying Maverick missiles, 500-pound bombs, backed by an AWACS, an airborne warning and control system, and an ELINT, electronic intelligence gathering plane, infiltrated northeastern Syria, a small pocket along the Euphrates River, overcoming enemy air defense missiles, and bombed a facility that the CIA told Congress just a few months ago was 2 to 3 weeks away from becoming operational. Had it become operational, the CIA director said, it would have been capable of producing enough fissionable material to manufacture 2 to 3 nuclear weapons per year. According to one report, the Israeli elite commando unit, known by its Hebrew name Sayeret Matkal, its English name General Staff Reconnaissance Unit, and for breathtaking and daring operations like the 1976 rescue of over 100 Air France hostages from Entebbe, Uganda, were disguised as Syrian soldiers, infiltrated the vicinity of the facility, took samples of what was there before it was bombed to verify, to in fact ensure that this was a facility of a nuclear nature. Other reports claim that the OFEC-7 satellite, launched in July 2007, Israel is one of 7 countries around the world with independent satellite launching capabilities. The OFEC-7 was diverted from tracking Iran's facilities to transmitting high-quality images of what was happening in Syria back to headquarters in Tel Aviv. Now you may be wondering and asking yourselves, what do these two events have in common? The assassination of Mornia and the bombing of the Syrian nuclear facility. Well, firstly, they're both major blows and embarrassments to the regime of Bashar Assad. The assassination of Mornia took place in Damascus, and the facility was being built by Syria. But more importantly, they are key today for Israel in its attempts to restore its level of deterrence in face of its enemies. Not an easy task, as we're about to see, but very important for Israel to do. And I'll get back to that later. But even more important than that, they also both send a clear message to Iran, which is today the greatest challenge and threat that Israel, as well as the rest of the world, are facing with what seems to be its unstoppable race towards becoming a nuclear power. But to get a little perspective on what this means, what does it mean for Israel, what does it mean for the Middle East, what does it mean for the entire world, I suggest we go back in time for a moment. To the year 2003 and to a different country, Libya. It was in December of that year that Libyan leader Colonel Muammar Gaddafi shocked the world when he announced that his country had decided to abandon several advanced programs for the development and production of weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear bombs. A subsequent visit by officials from the US and the UK to Libya discovered that Libya was in fact developing nuclear weapons on 2 parallel tracks. They were enriching uranium, and they're also trying to refine plutonium, similar to the state of Iran's nuclear program today. Now, while the world was relieved that Gaddafi had decided to abandon these programs, they were still puzzled as to how Libya, which for decades had been known to have nuclear aspirations, had succeeded in fast-forwarding its program from being decades away to being only a few years away. And the answer they quickly discovered was actually found in Islamabad, Pakistan, and in the office of that country's nuclear scientist and popular national hero, Dr. Abdul Qadir Khan, more notoriously known as AQ Khan. This Pakistani scientist, today under house arrest in Islamabad, was discovered to have been running a black market ring for the distribution, sale, proliferation of nuclear technology, not just to Libya, but also to North Korea, as well as to Iran. Now, as I said before, you can tell a lot about a person by the company they keep. The same applies to countries. Iran's best friends today are North Korea and Syria. North Korea, we know, already has a nuclear weapon. They've tested it. One day they're dismantling the reactor, one day they're rebuilding the reactor. Syria clearly was also on track. And for this reason, the bombing of the reactor in Syria sends a clear message to Iran that Israel will not hesitate to venture beyond its own borders and to use military force to neutralize a threat it views to be of an existential nature. It was, after all, the United States State Department that raised the possibility that it was A.Q. Khan's black market ring that supplied the technology or even the blueprints to Syria that were used in the construction of their nuclear reactor. Essentially, the policy that was set into effect by former Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin with the 1981 bombing of the Osirak reactor outside of Baghdad in Iraq is still in effect. The assassination of Mornia, a close associate of Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and the liaison between Hezbollah and the Iranian Revolutionary Guards demonstrates for us how the campaign against Iran takes form. Not just in diplomacy and sanctions debated around the United Nations Security Council table, but also in carefully executed assassinations in the dark shadows of Damascus. Now, as I said, Syria's nuclear aspirations are without a doubt connected to Iran's race towards nuclear power. One of the results of Iran's success in defying the world and in developing and enriching uranium will be that other countries will follow suit. Let's just take a look today at the Middle East. And this is a point that unfortunately is missed time over again. Let's take a look at Egypt. After Israel, which receives $3 billion in foreign military aid from the United States, according to a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU, signed last year, Egypt gets about $1.3 billion annually. This is since the 1979 Camp David Accords, when they made peace with Israel. Egypt, since then, with that foreign military, it has built up a formidable conventional military based on American-made platforms, Abrams tanks, Apache helicopters, Harpoon missiles. Now, if Egypt, which views itself as a regional superpower, will want to retain that status, the ante has now gone up. It's no longer enough to have a strong conventional military, which, by the way, on a side note, whenever they practice and hold exercises, strangely enough, although there is peace between Egypt and Israel, they train war with Israel. Right? When Israel holds major exercises, and they never hold an exercise of potential war with Egypt, it's always against Syrians or Hezbollah. But if Egypt wants to retain that status, then now, as I said, the ante has gone up. It's no longer enough to have a conventional military. You'd also have to have a nuclear weapon. And therefore, it came as no surprise when earlier this year, on a visit to Cairo, French President Nicolas Sarkozy announced at a joint press conference with the Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak that France will now begin to assist Egypt in conducting nuclear research and developing potentially a nuclear civilian program. At the same time, Turkey, another regional player, a member of NATO, a country eyeing membership with the European Union, the EU, views itself as a regional player. It came as no surprise when last year Turkey passed a bill in Parliament paving the way for the construction of 3 nuclear reactors over the next 15 years. And that's not even to mention Saudi Arabia or the other states in the Gulf, the Sunni states. If their foe, their greatest adversary in Iran, the Shia, they go nuclear, then the Sunni states in the Gulf may also try to pursue such a capability. And I don't have to bore you with the idea of countries in the Middle East that aren't so stable. The prospect of the Egyptians, Mubarak's regime, there's no clear succession in place. Who would succeed him? He's an octogenarian. He's not a young man. Questionable of how healthy he is. The House of Saud in Saudi Arabia, with growing Islamic radicals on the ground. The prospect of these countries becoming a nuclear states, and then that capability falling into the hands of radicals is a very frightening scenario. At the same time, when we understand, when we take a look at what's happening in the region, we can take a look at one country in specific more clearly, is Bahrain. Bahrain is a small country in the Gulf, according to the United Nations, one of the fastest growing economies today in the world. And most recently, 2 months ago, about a month and a half ago, the King of Bahrain made an unprecedented call in public to establish a new organization of Arab states in the Middle East together with Israel. Now, you're probably all familiar with the Arab League. It's basically an umbrella organization of all the different Arab countries in the Middle East that get together every once in a while, and mainly what they do is just bash Israel. But what the King of Bahrain's call is to establish we call it the Arab League 2, but Israel together. A new organization. Why would he want Israel in that organization alongside the other Arab states? And I think the answer is inside Bahrain. You take a look at Bahrain. Bahrain, the regime in Bahrain is Sunni. But the 70% of the population of Bahrain are Shiite. And I don't want to bore you also with following Prophet Muhammad's death and the split between the Sunnis and the Shiites. Who could succeed Muhammad? Is it Does it have to be a direct descendant, as the Shia argued, or can it be any worthy Muslim, as the Sunnis claim? And the Sunnis won. But what was once a religious disagreement today has turned into a bloody political struggle that plays out on the battlefields of Lebanon, Iraq, Israel, Afghanistan, and all these other countries. And therefore, the regime of Bahrain is genuinely concerned with the takeover of Iran. And there are people who say that if it weren't for the United States Navy's Fifth Fleet presence in Bahrain, Iran could take over like that. In addition, you take a look at the trends this past year in military procurement. The Pentagon, in 2008, approved weapon sales to the Middle East, reaching a whooping $55 billion. It's a huge amount of money. Now, these are a lot of systems that the countries in the region won't begin to receive until the middle of the next decade. One example is a $17 billion deal that was approved for Israel to purchase the Joint Strike Fighter, the JSF, the F-35. It's a stealth fighter jet, 5th generation, being developed here in Fort Worth, Texas by Lockheed Martin. Israel won't begin to get it, though, in 2014, 2015. But if you look at the Sunni states in the Gulf, look at what they're buying. They are investing billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars in ballistic missile defense systems. The United Arab Emirates, the UAE, recently received Pentagon approval to become the first country outside the United States to purchase the THAAD for $7 billion. The THAAD is the Terminal High Altitude Ballistic Missile Defense System, also being made by Lockheed Martin. That's not enough for the UAE. They're also buying PAC-3, Patriot missile defense systems. And so are the Saudis, so is Kuwait, and so are other countries. So you can ask yourself, what do they need these systems for? Are they afraid of an Israeli attack? No, of course not. Why would Israel attack any of these countries? They are, though, genuinely concerned with the prospect that Iran will become a nuclear country and one day threaten them along the way. And therefore, when you think of the fact also that they are Sunni states, Iran is Shia, one of the pillars of the Islamic Revolution from 1979 is to spread the revolution throughout the region, then they do have what to be concerned with. In addition, the possibility that Iran would provide a nuclear weapon to terrorist groups, in my opinion, while some people will tell you it would never happen, I believe it cannot be ruled out. Considering the fact that Iran over the years has provided impressive technological capabilities to different terrorist organizations around the world, Hezbollah, insurgents in Iraq, while it's a frightening scenario and may seem slim, it still is something that cannot be completely rejected. More broadly, if Iran can get away with violating the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, which it is a signatory to, then the whole global system for preventing the proliferation of nuclear technology and the development of nuclear weapons will likely fall apart. To date, while some people say the NPT system is outdated, it's no longer relevant, it has been effective. Several countries, such as South Africa, which already had a nuclear weapon, dismantled their program, and other countries that were on the way also stopped in order to sign on to the NPT. And there's also no longer any real doubt that Iran's true intentions are to develop a nuclear weapon. You probably all are familiar with the NIE, the National Intelligence Estimate from last December, put up by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, a man by the name of Michael McConnell, which concluded that they could not say for certain that Iran was in effect developing a nuclear military program. While it's clear that they have a civilian program for energy purposes, they could not conclude and say for certain that they were in fact developing a military program. But just take a look at the recent IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, the United Nations nuclear watchdog, a report put out by Mohammed al-Baradei, last year's Nobel Peace Prize winner, when he caught the world's attention when he noted the following: Iran had failed to explain the existence of a diagram for an underground testing facility, had failed to explain the testing of explosive detonators normally used for nuclear weapons, and failed to explain the existence of documents as well as a short video clip relating to the modification of Iran's long-range Shihab-3 ballistic missile to be able to enable it to accommodate a nuclear warhead. But while that may seem disturbing, take a look at the following. What I found most disturbing was an offhand passage in the report referring to work being done at a facility called the Institute for Applied Physics, the IAP. It's an Iranian military research facility. And here's the quote. The IAEA has also inquired about the reasons for the inclusion in the CV and the resume of an IAP employee of an equation for the evolving radius of a nuclear explosion ball with photos of the 1945 Trinity test. What is the 1945 Trinity test? That would be the explosion of a plutonium bomb in the New Mexico desert on July 16th, 1945. So what the IAEA was asking was, why would an Iranian scientist need to have that equation on his resume, if not for the fact that his employers, the Iranian regime, saw a possible application for that equation to their country's nuclear program. Now, in all, Iran has built about 36 nuclear facilities scattered throughout the country, some of them in underground bunkers. According to Israeli intelligence estimates, Iran already has 1/3 of the enriched uranium required to develop one nuclear bomb, and will in the coming months overcome technological obstacles it is still encountering with its attempts to integrate P2 centrifuges. This is a more advanced centrifuge. Until now they've been working with P1. The attempts to integrate P2 centrifuges into their facility in Natanz, where they have several thousand centrifuges spinning as we speak to enrich uranium. According to that timeline, by the end of the decade, Iran will likely become a nuclear country. Now, it was only in the early 1990s that Iran began to take up the focus of Israel's military intelligence. Until then, Iraq, with the Scuds in the first Gulf War, was perceived to be the primary threat. But then, Israel learned of the nuclear military program, as well of Iran's development and production of long-range ballistic missiles called the Shihab. In response, Israel began to invest in advanced military platforms, and in the past 2 years alone has launched into space 3 spy satellites. On a side note, the most recent satellite, launched in April from India, as a matter of fact. It had to do something with the way the world revolves and gravity, and that's why they launched it from India. It's called the Texar satellite. This is a new satellite. Most satellites use a camera, right, to come down and take really high-resolution images. This satellite, though, as you can imagine, when you have fog or like visibility today here in LA, you can't really see much that's happening on the ground from space. But this satellite uses a radar technology that enables it to take high-resolution images in any weather condition, fog, cloud, no matter what. Even see through some non-concrete rooftops. You can all imagine what that does for Israel's intelligence gathering capabilities. At the same time, Israel purchased long-range and sophisticated aircraft like the F-15 and F-16 from the United States, which Israeli Air Force officers boast can easily reach Iran. And Israel also made upgrades to its Arrow 2 ballistic missile defense system, which Israel claims and has tested can effectively intercept and destroy incoming Shihab and Scud missiles. This was all being done, though, while aware that a military strike against Iran's facilities would be far more difficult than the 1981 bombing of the Iraq reactor or the 2007 bombing of the Syrian reactor. There, it was one facility above ground. Today, we talk about dozens, scattered, some of them in underground bunkers. But what Israel had to do was to create an image that, if needed, it had the will and the firepower, essentially preparing for doomsday. At the same time, Israel launched possibly one of the greatest diplomatic initiatives in its history, warning from every available podium of this growing and looming threat in Iran. And I would even say, as ironic as it sounds, that the rise to power in 2005 by Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, a denier of the Holocaust, a man who persistently calls for the destruction of Israel, helped grab the world's attention. But unfortunately, not enough. Because even though several rounds of sanctions have been imposed on Iran, they have yet to change their ways, and they continue today to enrich uranium and to race, or gallop, as military intelligence in Israel likes to say, towards becoming a nuclear country. But now, with the presidential elections over in the United States, 2 weeks ago, Barack Obama was elected to become the 44th president of the United States. Concern in Israel is rising as to what will be the policies of this new administration, mainly with regard to Iran, but also Hezbollah, Syria, and the Palestinians. Interestingly enough, though, a change of leadership is not just happening here in the United States come January 20th with the inauguration of Obama. But on February 10th, Israel will head to elections. Today, the two front runners in Israel are Kadima chairwoman, Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni, the woman who has been leading Israel's negotiation team with the Palestinians over the past year since last November's Annapolis conference, discussing all of the sensitive issues on the table. Withdrawal from the West Bank, a division of Jerusalem. Her government today, which she is a member of, the Ehud Olmert government, is also in indirect negotiations with the Syrians over a potential withdrawal from the Golan Heights. Or will it be Likud chairman, opposition leader, former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who today is building a dream team, as we're told, bringing back all these former politicians, former Israeli Chief of Staff, Moshe Bogi Ya'alon, Benny Begin, Dan Meridor, and all these other people are joining now Likud. Will he win? He has said already in the Knesset that he will not divide Jerusalem, he will not withdraw from the Golan Heights, and he will prevent Iran from becoming nuclear. Will one of them obtain a peace deal with the Palestinians? What will they do with Iran? What will they do with Syria? These are the questions that Israel is asking itself as it heads towards February 10th. But it's also not just Israel and the U.S. In June, Iran will head to presidential elections. And also there, people are wondering what will happen. Will Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad be re-elected? He's already received endorsement of the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Or will maybe some more moderate, although you always have to ask yourself, what does moderate mean in Iran? But will a more moderate leader potentially win? Khatami, the former president, is considering throwing his hat into the ring, although has yet to officially declare that. But also in the Palestinian Authority, there is potential for another change of regime. On January 9th, 11 days before Barack Obama takes office, the presidential term of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas will come to an end. Now, as we all saw, as was beautifully demonstrated in the United States 2 weeks ago, when a president's term comes to an end, you hold elections, right? That's how it works. Unfortunately, in the Palestinian Authority today, you haven't heard of elections because they're not holding elections. That has to do with the fact that Hamas, a terrorist group, is in charge of the Gaza Strip, and Fatah, the party that Israel is negotiating with, perceived to be the more moderate party, is in control of the West Bank. Since the coup d'etat of June 2007, when Hamas overran Fatah and took over the West Bank, they have nothing to do with one another. And Abbas has said he will only talk to Hamas if they return the situation in Gaza to the way it was before the coup d'etat of 2007. Now, in absence of elections, according to the Palestinian Constitution, what is supposed to happen is that the Speaker of the Parliament is supposed to take over as the President. But there's a catch. Speaker of Parliament today is a man by the name of Abdul Aziz Dweck, Hamas official from Ramallah. Guess where he is? He's been in an Israeli prison for the past 2 years for terrorist involvement and activity. So he can't now become president. His deputy, next in line, is a man by the name of Ahmed Bahar. He's from the Gaza Strip, Hamas official as well. Not in Israeli custody because he's in the Gaza Strip. And I don't have to tell you that the prospect of a Palestinian president being from Hamas means there is no peace process, there are no peace negotiations. With that said, what's more likely to happen is that Abbas will try to stay in his position. And then there is concern that Hamas may try to take over the West Bank like it did the Gaza Strip, although far more difficult considering the IDF's presence there. There's also concern that Hamas may try to assassinate Fatah officials, and Israel fears that this could spill over and potentially lead to a third intifada. Let's talk about the policies themselves. Israel is told, the world is told, that under a Barack Obama presidency, he said it in a July interview with the Jerusalem Post, he will engage Iran, and I quote, in tough, direct talks. Now, it took Israelis, 2 days to keep their mouths shut following Obama's election. Tzipi Livni, the foreign minister, said on Thursday, after Tuesday's election, that she calls on the U.S. not to engage Iran. The fear is that today a dialogue with Iran would project weakness and not power. And Israel's concern is genuine. And I believe, and the way I understand it, is that Israel is concerned that these talks, this dialogue, while it hasn't been tried yet, but would be used to stall for time, would be misused by Iran, which doesn't have sincere intentions here in such a dialogue, and will continue to develop a nuclear weapon. And one day we'll all wake up and find out that yes, there was this dialogue that appeared to be doing something, but Iran has become nuclear. And I say this without taking a stance on who the president should have been or would have been or who would have made a better president, but this is the way that Israel views these policies. At the same time, everything I mentioned before, whenever is likely to feature prominently on Barack Obama's agenda. Let's not ignore that. Whenever the president is in office in Washington, every day he receives what's called the PDB, the President's Daily Brief. It's a summary of all the main issues, all the main events taking place in the world that day by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. All of these issues, the Palestinian Authority, Iran, Hezbollah, Syria, Hamas, will feature prominently, and he will have to make decisions of how to deal with this, and Israel is following with great trepidation. Now, at the moment, over the next 9 to 10 weeks, the Bush administration will have to make two key decisions. Do we attack Iran, or do we come to terms with the nuclear Iran? And the second decision is what to do with the Annapolis Conference, launched with great fanfare last November, the renewal of peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians. And we're already told by Condoleezza Rice that there won't be a peace deal by the end of the year. At the moment, the likelihood of an American strike, an Israeli strike, or a joint American-Israeli strike against Iran appears to be low. America is currently in the throes of a profound economic crisis and facing major difficulties with its two wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The last thing it needs, some will tell you, is another war or military venture in the Middle East. At the same time, there are signs pointing possibly in the opposite direction. Last month, in the Negev desert in southern Israel, the X-band radar arrived. The X-band radar is one of the most advanced radars in the world today, can track a target the size of a baseball from thousands of miles away. And it was given to Israel by the United States to link up to Israel's aeroballistic missile defense system to enable it to track Iranian missiles, Syrian missiles from farther away and be able to intercept them. We have more chances of intercepting them. This could be seen as a bolstering of home front defenses ahead of a possible strike. Let's also not forget that Bush's freedom of action is far greater today than what it will be of his successor come January 20th. What Israel has been asking for and urging for the past several years are enforced economic sanctions. You look today at what's happening in the world when it comes to Iran, and you see that countries like Italy, Germany, Austria continue to do business with Iran by the billions every year. Why should Iran change its way? What Israel has called for are enforced sanctions, not like those that have been imposed until now that have to do with restrictions on the travel restrictions for nuclear scientists or selling nuclear components, which they're able to get anyhow. Israel is one possibility that has been thrown around in Israel many times, and you probably heard of, is to cut off the supply of refined fuel, of oil. They have loads of oil, but they can't refine it on their own. They don't have independent refinement capabilities. Why not cut off that supply? That could get the regime in Iran to rethink its ways. At the same time, let's not forget that the Islamic Revolution in Iran, when it took over in 1979, promised a prosperity that never took place. Instead, you have today runaway inflation, high unemployment, growing discontent with the Iranian regime. But Israel, despite all this concern, is not stupid and has its eyes open and realizes that Barack Obama will likely engage Iran in a dialogue. And today there already is a thinking process within the Israeli Defense Ministry as well as in the Foreign Ministry of whether Israel should be in the room if that dialogue does take place. Because let's not forget, what America and Iran will be sitting down to talk about is, basically by sitting and talking to Iran, you will be recognizing, giving Iran the recognition that it is a superpower, it is a regional player. Israel has interests as well that will likely be touched upon in such a dialogue. So there's a question of whether Israel should be in the room. And if it's not in the room, how does it ensure that its interests are protected? But at the same time, Iran is not the only issue. Iraq. Israel is concerned with the prospect of a premature withdrawal from Iraq, which it fears could lead to a Sunni-Shiite civil war, flare-up, clashes that could potentially lead to regional instability. Let's not forget that the regime today in Iraq will also go to elections later this year, in 2009. But they have very strong ties. They're Shia as well, and they have very strong ties with Iran. And Iran is already meddling in affairs in Iraq. And for that reason, it came as no surprise when in the latest multi-year plan, put out every 5 years by the IDF, by the Israel Defense Forces, Iraq wants, it's basically a plan that you lay out what military platforms you'll buy over the next 5 years, as well as you take a look and you spell out what the regional strategic picture looks like. And in this past plan, put out last September, called TEFEN, the IDF once again put Iraq back in the plan after a 10-year absence. And that goes to show you how concerned Israel is with the possibility that Iraq, which in the past year alone received approval to purchase weaponry from the United States of $12 billion, how Israel is concerned that Iraq also, one day along the way, could again become a threat to Israel. Now in the final analysis, what is important to keep in mind is that a strong America does mean a strong Israel. Israel is linked by the hip to the United States, strategically, militarily, ideologically, and others. And a strong United States does mean a strong Israel. And that's why, from an Israeli perspective, what is most important for this new administration to do is to restore America's image in the world. Because that ultimately will reflect on how Israel is also perceived in the Middle East. This is not a simple job, considering the difficulties that this new administration will be facing. And particularly when you take a quick glance across the Middle East, you see that Israel's strategic arena today is fraught with points of friction that could erupt at any moment. Hezbollah is still calling to avenge and to retaliate the assassination of Mornia this past February. Syria is building up weaponry, buying advanced missiles, anti-tank missiles from Russia. Israel is concerned with what will happen revolving the January 9th date in the Palestinian Authority, the possibility of a third intifada. And how the new leaders here in Israel, in Iran, in the West Bank, how they behave, conduct themselves, what they do, will undoubtedly determine their place in history. And that is why, when it comes back to Iran, the sense of urgency is evident on all military levels in Israel. I had a recent meeting with the outgoing head of the Israeli Air Force, a general by the name of Elazar Shkedi. As I'm sitting with him, he tells me how he recently gave an order to the head of his branch's history department to put together a paper comparing public remarks made by Adolf Hitler in the 1920s and 30s to those made by Ahmadinejad since his rise to power in 2005. And I don't have to tell you that that's not something that Air Force commanders do every day, right? Put together papers like this. But here's one example that is frightening. In 1922, Hitler said, "If I'm ever really in power, the destruction of the Jews will be my first and most important job." In 2005, at a conference called A World Without Zionism, Ahmadinejad said, "Israel must be wiped off the map." A few months ago he said, "The Zionist regime is a decaying and crumbling tree that will fall with the storm." But despite all this, Israel does not believe that it is the only country being threatened by Iran. One way they arrive at this conclusion is taking a look at Iran's development of ballistic missiles. They have the Shihab series. They have the Zelzals, Fajrs, missiles they provided to Hezbollah before the war in 2006 and likely have given since the war. But they have the Shihab. Now they have the Shihab 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The 1 and 2 can reach anywhere in Israel. The 3, Yemen, Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. The 4, Eastern Europe. And the 5 inches already into Western Europe. You have to ask yourself, what does Iran need missiles like this for if their only enemy is Israel? And the answer you don't have to hear from Yaakov Katz, because Ahmadinejad himself is happy to provide it for you. In his recent appearance before the United Nations General Assembly, which was, I think shouldn't have happened, but it does make a difference. This past September, Ahmadinejad embarked on a discourse about the wonders of the 12th Imam. Now you would have thought he would have come to the UN to talk about how his country's nuclear program is really for civilian purposes, to reassure the world. Instead, he embarks on this discourse about the wonders of the 12th Imam. Now for those of you who may be unacquainted with the more obscure tenets of Islamic theology, the 12th Imam, also known as the hidden Imam, is held by devout Shiite Muslims to be a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, and to have in the 9th century at the age of 5 gone into hiding, never to have been seen since. His followers, among them Ahmadinejad, who by the way is mayor of Tehran, expanded one of the main thoroughfares, one of the main drags in Tehran, from a 4-lane highway to an 8-lane highway to accommodate the arrival of the hidden Imam. But he believes that the hidden Imam, these followers believe that when the hidden Imam will return, is only after a period of cosmic chaos and bloodshed, what some of us might call the apocalypse. And then he will lead the world into an era of universal peace. Let me quote to you from what he said. "The era of Western predominance is drawing to a close and will soon be replaced by a bright future ushered in by the 12th Imam's return. O great Almighty, deliver the Savior of nations and put an end to the sufferings of mankind and bring forth justice, beauty, and love." The bottom line is that for Ahmadinejad, we cannot fool ourselves. Israel is not the only threat. The great Satan, the United States, the country we're in, the European Union, the UK, Canada, and other Western countries are also in their sights and targets. And how do we also know this is when you take a look at Iran's influence. It's not just being felt on the nuclear track. They are the greatest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, with proxies all over the Middle East. They have the al-Sadr Shiite Mahdi army in Iraq, the Alawite regime in Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the West Bank and Gaza, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan. Why do they use proxies? Because this way they avoid getting their hands dirty, obtaining maximum instability but with minimum responsibility. And from a historical perspective, I would argue that Ahmadinejad and his allies have reason to believe that they can't succeed, and that their objective to destroy the state of Israel is on track. They take credit for pushing the Americans out of Lebanon in the early 80s, the Soviets out of Afghanistan in the late 80s, Israel out of Lebanon with its withdrawal in 2000 from the security zone, Israel's withdrawal in 2005 from Gaza, the Spanish withdrawal from Iraq in 2004, and as well as denying Israel a victory in the summer of 2006 in the war it fought against Hezbollah. Everything I spoke about needs to be viewed from the prism of the 2006 Lebanon war. Let's take a look just at the results very quickly. 4,000 rockets pounded northern Israel from Haifa north, displacing about 1 million Israelis. The most rockets in any modern war. 122 soldiers were killed, 43 civilians. I used to say 119 soldiers, but then we got back Regev and Goldwassers, that went up to 121, and then one soldier who was injured during the war recently passed away, so we've hit now 122. 122 soldiers, 43 civilians killed during the war. Extensive damage caused throughout the northern Israel. Israel in return caused extensive damage in southern Lebanon, in the Dachia neighborhood of Beirut, which was where Hezbollah's main command posts were. But despite all that, the 600 to 700 Hezbollah guerrillas who were killed, Hezbollah today is stronger than it was before the war. Before the war they had 15,000 rockets, today they have 30 to 40,000. With longer ranges and larger warheads, capable of encompassing the entire state of Israel. They have anti-aircraft missiles. No longer does Israel have the freedom to fly over Lebanon like it used to. They have anti-ship missiles, radar systems. Basically, while I believe there is a new diplomatic reality in Lebanon, that's a whole separate issue. What happened in the war, the results of the war joined a process that had begun in the year 2000, which saw the decline of Israel's level of deterrence. In 2000, Israel withdrew from Lebanon, southern Lebanon, where it had maintained a security zone for 18 years, since 1982, and was perceived to have been chased out by Hezbollah. That process, that decline continued in 2005 when Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza, and in January 2006, the following elections, Hamas came to power, and we all know the results today. And that continued to decline in the war in 2006. And I would say that most recently, what we're seeing today are attempts by Israel to restore its level of deterrence. The assassination of Mornia sends a clear, while it demonstrates for us how the campaign against Iran takes form, it does, in my opinion, send a clear message to other countries, other terrorists, and other terror groups. And while Israel has not taken responsibility, claimed responsibility for the assassination, it makes no difference because it's a question of perception. When terrorists know that decades after perpetrating attacks, they can still be caught, nabbed, targeted, that does create a message. That trickles down. The targeting, the bombing of the Syrian reactor sends a message to Iran that Israel, the only country in the world to have destroyed 2 reactors, not 1 but 2, no other country has ever destroyed a reactor, to have destroyed 2 reactors, does not hesitate to use force when it views a threat to be of an existential nature. Now in the IDF, you go into any officer's office, they have 2 phones on their desk. One is a red phone and one is a white phone. The white phone is used for regular, routine, mundane phone calls. The red phone is a secure, encrypted line used for classified phone conversations. Now there are some officers who have a red phone next to their bed at home at night. One of them is the head of Israeli military intelligence, a general by the name of Amos Yadlin. His previous post was military attaché here to Washington. Yadlin recently told me that his red phone at home next to his bed rings almost every night. But that's not what's interesting. What's interesting is what he said next, is that he never knows what the phone call will be about. And that's because today, 60 years of existence, Israel is still threatened on so many different fronts. You have the Iranian nuclear program, that could be what the phone call is about. Syrian plans, they're rebuilding, they are rearming, building up changes in military formation. Hezbollah plans to kidnap soldiers or retaliate to avenge the assassination of Mornia. Hamas plans to kidnap another soldier, we didn't mention Gilad Shalit, still being held almost 900 days later inside the Gaza Strip. As well as the possibility that global jihad, Al-Qaeda, has said that Israel is one of their main targets for the coming year. So even though Israel has been around for 60 years, there are countries in the region, people, who have yet to come to terms with the fact that there is a Jewish independent state within their midst. And I would say that ultimately, though, it is the resilience and fortitude of the Israeli people that's demonstrated to me on a daily basis that will ensure that we continue to survive. I recently saw it in the 2006 war, went up in Haifa to hear briefings from the IDF, had a break and decided to go outside. And I don't know if any of you were in Israel during the war, but what was striking up north was how everything was closed. Post offices, banks, grocery stores, you name it, shut down. And I'm walking through Haifa and I see one store open, a flower shop. And the guy's out there watering his flower pots. And I said to him, couldn't hold back, what are you doing open? You know, everybody's indoors, no one's open. And he looked at me with a straight face and said, I want people to know that if they want flowers, they have where to go. So then I said to myself, this guy is clearly Meshuggah, right? He's clearly crazy. But then I realized exactly what the message was. And that is that really people may want flowers. Life does go on. And that resilience, that fortitude is what got Israel through its wars that it's fought every decade since its establishment. The War of 48, of 56, of 67, of 73, of 82, the First Intifada, the Second Intifada in 2000, as well as the Second Lebanon War in 2006. That resilience, that fortitude is what I believe will ensure Israel's victory ultimately against its enemies. Before, we spoke about deterrence. And the ultimate test of deterrence is to see if your enemy is willing to do something today that they were not willing to do the day before. And for that, when it comes to Israel, only time will tell. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I'm not running for office, but I appreciate it. Yeah, I'll deal with it.
Good.
Thank you.
By all means.
Yes, sir.
I read, actually, in the Jerusalem Post that a thing that may be on the agenda for the Obama administration would be to do a deal with Iran where they cancel their nuclear program in exchange for Israel being disarmed nuclearly. Is that a possibility?
It could be that is a policy, that is a thinking that currently taking place within people surrounding Barack Obama, or Barack Obama himself. I don't know. But ultimately, I don't see that ever happening within Israel. Israel's nuclear program has been an effective deterrent against its enemies for decades. It was established in the 50s when Israel was a newborn state facing on the verge of extinction, and has worked effectively over the years. Now, Israel has maintained a policy of ambiguity, not saying whether it does have nuclear weapons, but also not denying that it has nuclear weapons. And it was actually our great friend Jimmy Carter who recently said that Israel has about 150 to 200 nuclear weapons, and as a former president he may know. But ultimately, Israel's policy is not to be the first to introduce nuclear weapons into the region. And I think that's what Israel will stand by, that continue with that policy.
But could the United States impose that on Israel?
I don't think so. No, in the Middle East, a concession is perceived as weakness, not as a power. And I think, unfortunately, I hear this a lot. I go around college campuses and you talk to the poli-sci students, and they all say, well, there are all these different ideas, initiatives. Let's all sign an agreement, create a non-proliferation, nuclear-free world. It's a beautiful idea, but it's just not practical. You can't be that naive, unfortunately, when you look at what happens today in the Middle East. Yes, sir.
Could you repeat the question?
Oh, okay, sure. Yes.
Mr. Katz, I just returned.
I like your shirt. Right.
I think in the last remaining 2 months of President Bush's office, they can do the job now. And I'm also
the question. I'm sorry to cut you off, but
what do you think of the idea of that idea that they do it?
Right.
Bush does it, not wait for Obama or anyone else.
Right. The question was, I don't know if you heard of what the prospect of America attacking Iran's nuclear facilities.
Without an invading army.
You wouldn't need an invasion, because that's not what you're after. What you're after is just to stop their nuclear program. At the same.
Or Israel doing it, somebody doing it.
Right, okay. At the same time, so that enhances the question a bit. But I'll touch upon both issues. First of all, there's no doubt that the United States has far more superior military capabilities than Israel to carry out such a strike. The U.S. has bases in Iraq, has bases in Afghanistan, has aircraft carriers in the Gulf that could be used as platforms to launch such a strike. They have cruise missiles on their military ships as well as in their submarines. They without a doubt have the capability. They have F-22 stealth fighter jets that are currently operational out of Langley. They have the capability without a doubt. No doubt about it. Will they do it is a whole separate question. And the likelihood, the Israeli intelligence assessment today is that America will not attack Iran. They're in the throes of a profound economic crisis, and that has taken it off the table. While Bush, and there was, as well as the fact that when you have a defense secretary such as Robert Gates who is opposed to a strike against Iran, then it's very difficult for the administration to carry out a strike behind the back of their defense secretary. While Cheney and Bush may be more in favor, with Gates against, it's viewed as being not possible. With that said, an Israeli strike, there was a lot of talk that this was before the elections, that if Obama were to win, Israel's window of opportunity would be no better than now, between the elections and the time and the date he takes office, because you'll still have that friendly person in the White House called George Bush. With that said, there have reports that have been surfacing, and I've heard this also from inside, is that the president has not given Israel the green light to carry out a strike. Now, what does that mean, hasn't given them the green light? Why does Israel need American permission? It's because I'll remind you that in 1991, in the first Gulf War, when Scud missiles were fired from Iraq into Israel, Israel wanted to respond. In order to respond, though, you have to fly into Iraq. To fly into Iraq, you need what's called the codes. The codes is how one airplane identifies the other airplane. In this case, Israel identifying America, vice versa. America, George Bush Sr. at the time, refused to give Israel the codes, and therefore Israeli jets stayed on the ground. Without codes, Israel can't fly over Iraq, which is clearly the quickest route to get to Iran. What would be ideal is to be able to use military bases, rearm, refuel. That's not going to happen. You have the more convoluted route, which is to dip down and up through Saudi Arabia, and the Saudis may turn a blind eye, considering their genuine concern with Iran. That's a much farther, longer route, would require extensive mid-air refueling. And Israel has a capability, undisclosed how many tankers they have, but they have a capability, although an aging fleet of Boeing 707s, I think they are. And there the effectiveness of such a strike already is put into question. At the same time, you have the difficulties of bunker facilities such as Natanz, meters underground, concrete steel bunkers. Israel has a number of bunker buster missiles, but how effective would they be? How many would you require? Very, very difficult operation. At the same time, from what I hear, is that Israel does have the capability to knock out key facilities, set them back. Now, even if you set them back 1, 2, 3 years, you have to ask it needs to be followed up with tough diplomacy. The world until now has failed with tough diplomacy. What makes you think that after a strike, when they'll all be against us because the price of oil will have skyrocketed, right? And the world, particularly in Europe, will be turning against us. What makes you think that then they'll be willing to engage in tough diplomacy? As I mentioned before, Israel is following very closely and with great concern what his policies will be, mainly with Iran and the dialogue that he's spoken about, engaging Iran in such a dialogue, as well as now we've heard, and today there was a Sunday Times report coming out of Britain that he's pushing the Saudi initiative, the 2002 initiative of King Abdallah, which calls for withdrawal of Israel to pre-67 borders, and according to the Saudi initiative, it calls for withdrawal to pre-67 borders and a just solution to the language is a just solution to the refugee issue. Now, for Israel, a just solution, I can tell you that at least from an Israeli perspective within the government, and this is one thing that Defense Minister Barak has said and others have said, is that the language of a just solution to the refugee issue does leave open the possibility of compensation as opposed to an actual physical return. And that's why Israel was, at a certain point of time, warm to the Saudi initiative. And this would see the normalization of all ties. And we're told that Barack Obama told Abbas, apparently in his visit in July, that Israel would be, I don't know what the language would be, stupid or naive not to accept such an initiative. And Israel is not running towards accepting such a deal because withdrawal today from the West Bank would be catastrophic for Israel, would bring rockets into Israeli cities like Tel Aviv, Kfar Saba, Herzliya within weeks. Hamas would take over the West Bank not within weeks but within days. And for that reason, a withdrawal today is just not practical. I don't know. I don't know. Yes, ma'am. Shh.
Thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you.
Presentation. There was an article that I read recently on the front page about Robert Malley. Are you guys familiar with him?
Robert Malley?
Alex.
No.
Familiar with him? Okay, the reason I'm asking about it is because apparently he's become part of the inner circle and he will be part of Obama's government. And he is a virulent hater of Israel. He has been all through his life. And the fact is that I wanted to know what, and you've given us quite a big presentation about but so I can't ask you about Malley. But my concern is that the people that he's surrounding himself with
Issue is Israel. And I think that what we saw in this election is that that may not be the case. And, that could be justified or not justified. It doesn't make a difference. You have other advisors who he's taken, such as Rahm Emanuel, and others who he's taken, such as Rahm Emanuel, who is the son of an Israeli, leads some people to say that this is no doubt a friend. I would say that in Israel they're wary of such appointments because, when you have someone who has that dual identity, sometimes they do need to be a little tougher on Israel, let's say, to show that they don't have... Now, I don't know that that's what Rahm Emanuel will do. Please don't misinterpret me. But all I'm saying is that such a concern does exist. Yes, ma'am. I just want to ask one thing. If we try to be precise and concise with questions, this way we can... Yes?
Speak with me, Benjamin Netanyahu. Who will stand up best to the coming administration?
Okay. Everyone heard the question? Right. Who would stand up better against Barack Obama's administration, Livni or Netanyahu? Okay, so you got your answer. One second. No, I'll give an answer. Ultimately, at the moment, what's interesting is that the elections here in the U.S. are being used as a political tool or political pawn in the Israeli chess game of politics, with Livni's side creating the spin that now that Obama, the change, has taken and overcome the United States, Israel also needs that change and to have like the Democrat work with the Democrat type of thing. They're trying to scare voters away from voting for Netanyahu. Netanyahu will tell you that, as almost an American, considering the fact that he lived here for many years, was educated here, a former prime minister, tough, that he's the one who you need to stand up to a Barack Obama administration. I can't give you an answer of who would be better. I mean, I think that would be crossing a line that I try not to cross, which is voicing a personal political opinion. But ultimately, I think the Israeli people will have their say. At the moment, both leaders are revolving around about 30 seats. The polls are very close. But till February, that's a lifetime in the Middle East until February. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Terrific discussion. Painful subjects.
And here.
I said a terrific discussion. You can repeat that point. My question is this, about the ability of Israel to strike Iran from submarines with missiles that fire like the American missiles, with atomic weapons, in two situations. We're looking, I find you, in Israel alone in the world, without any support from America, maybe hostility. But aside from that, you're describing Iran having the bomb by 2 years, maybe sooner. So Israel must have some ability for mutual assured destruction, and airplanes are unreliable with the distances you're describing. What's the status
of the submarines?
Standpoint of the submarines' ability to launch atomic weapons at Iran?
The question was, what's Israel's capability when it comes to launching missiles tipped with nuclear warheads from its submarines? Israel has 3 operational submarines, Dolphin class, made by Germany. 2 were given to Israel following the first Gulf War in a gift, and 2 are currently being built in Germany. Another 2, so Israel will have 5, but those will only be operational by the end of the decade. As a matter of fact, Germany's picking up a third of the tab, and Germany is viewed as a strong friend with Israel, despite the business it does do with Iran. With all that said, according to foreign media reports, Israel does have the capability to launch Jericho missiles. That's an Israeli-made long-range ballistic missile. Today, Israel has the Jericho 1, the Jericho 2, and recently tested the Jericho 3. Although it was a report that came out that Israel tested a missile, it wasn't said that it was the Jericho 3. And that Israel can launch Jericho missiles also from its subs, according to foreign reports, again, carrying nuclear warheads. With that said, I do not believe that Israel will be the first to introduce nuclear weapons into the Middle East.
Does that mean attack with nuclear weapons or introduce?
That means an attack with nuclear weapons, and that means also to say that they exist. There has been a thought. Israel's policy of ambiguity, which is held up until now. There was a thought recently with Iran's continued race towards nuclear power to change that policy and to say, like when Iran says, we'll wipe you off the map, for Israel to say, well, we can do the same to you because we also have nuclear weapons, or to even test a nuclear weapon and to show the world that we have this capability. The decision was made on all levels of the military as well as in the government to continue and maintain the policy of ambiguity. Because it has been effective and because Israel does not want to be the first to introduce nuclear weapons and to then start off what potentially could be a nuclear arms race, although we are starting to see that today with Iran's continued development of nuclear weapons. I believe that in a strike against Iran, if it were to happen, even not to use nuclear weapons, you could still use your submarines with the long-range missiles that the submarines carry. But also what the submarines do create is a perception of Israel having a second strike capability. So the Iranians do know that even if they were to nuke Israel, Israel would still be able to fire back missiles. You don't even need submarines because Israel has missile silos throughout the country that would likely not be affected even in a nuclear strike, let's say in Tel Aviv. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, you had a question.
If Obama succeeds in getting the world powers to recognize us and become a superpower again, would you recommend then talking to Ahmadinejad?
Well, that's a good question. I think that you need to, definitely if you're going to hold a dialogue with Iran, you need to be coming from a position of power, not a position of weakness. And today, the United States, unfortunately, is perceived to be a weak country, mainly due to the difficulties it's facing in Iraq and Afghanistan, but also because of the economic crisis. that around the world, people look at America and don't see it necessarily as the strongest country anymore in the world. And you have a rising power in Russia again, although now the price of oil is certainly affecting also Russia as well as Iran. The price of oil is no longer $135 a barrel. There was actually Thomas Friedman in the New York Times who last week, and I don't know how true this is, but he claimed that it was the drop in oil prices that brought down the downfall of the Soviet Union, and he argued that it's potentially possible that will happen also with Iran. Maybe it is. But ultimately, you do need to come from a position of power. I think whether or not, he's going to talk to Iran, right? I mean, he said he will. That's his main policy. His main foreign policy is to talk and engage in dialogue with enemies of the United States that until now have been held in isolation. It's not only Iran, it's also Syria, it's also Cuba, Venezuela. I mean, these are other countries as well. You need to come from a position of power. One way to do that with Iran is at the same time, if you talk to them now, they will view it as a victory, right? And there's no reason for them to stop. But if you hit them at the same time with economic sanctions, you go on two tracks. One is the dialogue, and one is economic sanctions. You have a way of at least denying them the victory and showing them that even though you're talking to them, they're still paying a price for what they're doing. Yes?
Yes. This ideal administration that's coming in doesn't understand a thing about Islam. They don't understand Sharia law, which allows them to lie. And the second thing is they glorify him. So it's nothing for Iran to lob a nuclear weapon anywhere, because if they get annihilated, so be it. They're all going to go upstairs with 72 virgins.
Okay.
So how can this administration be educated, which I think is almost an impossibility? I cannot fathom it.
That's a good question. I don't really have I don't know how to educate the administration. Is to certainly discuss the issues, get the issues out there, talk about them, get them published, create more awareness within the public. More than that, lobby on behalf of what you believe in. I mean, that's the best answer I can give you at the moment. Yeah, you in the back. Either one.
Do you see any reason to hope that this administration will actually live up to the promises of the voted? No. Do you see any reasons whatsoever for that?
There are other people answering on my behalf, so I don't have to answer.
I would like to know your opinion. Right. If you find any reasons whatsoever to hope that this administration will be...
You know what? I hope for everyone's... I hope for all of us, for the United States and for Israel, that it will live up to the expectations and will succeed. I hope for everyone that Barack Obama will turn out to be the best president the United States has ever had. But you know what? I mean, will that happen or will that not? Prophecy, according to the Talmud, was given to the fools. So I'm not a prophet. At the same time, though, we can hope, and I think that's what we need to, obviously be hopeful, but clearly lobby on behalf of what we believe in. Educate. There's not awareness out there, and ignorance is the greatest pitfall to mankind, in my opinion. Yeah.
Do you know the difference between Tzipi Livni and Netanyahu in terms of the attitude to Iran? Is there a difference between them?
Ultimately, is there a difference between? Is there a difference between Tzipi Livni and Benjamin Netanyahu when it comes to their policies vis-a-vis Iran?
Yeah.
What I was going to say was that ultimately there has been a consensus until now within Israel that Israel cannot live with nuclear Iran, it needs to stop Iran. Livni has said that as well, and has also spoken even harsher by saying that the military option is on the table and is viewed as a last resort. Netanyahu has also spoken tough on Iran. I don't want to say that one may be more inclined to strike than the other. I can't know that. I don't know. My gut would tell me that Livni, who comes from the foreign ministry, and it was the author of the 1701 resolution with the United Nations Security Council that brought an end to the war, which hasn't been much of a success in Lebanon. Maybe she'd be more inclined to give diplomacy more of a chance. Netanyahu, more a hardliner, maybe more inclined to use military force, although at the end of the day, Bibi can say whatever he wants today, but once he takes office, it all changes, and we shouldn't believe that it's otherwise. People always, Bibi won't negotiate with the Palestinians, and he said just yesterday he'll negotiate with the Palestinians, right? Bibi won't sign peace agreements with the Palestinians, and the Hebron agreement has got his signature on it. So let's not live in an illusion. Yes, sir.
The Hamas government is known by the whole world as a terrorist organization. From your conversation with the Israeli generals and politics, why don't we go after the leadership of the Hamas, meaning their government?
because, there's something called insurance. And here in LA, I think a lot of people are beginning to think about that term more with now houses burning down. But the insurance card that Hamas has today is called Gilad Shalit. And the assassination of Hamas leaders such as Ismail Haniyeh or some of these other guys could potentially lead to them harming or even killing Gilad Shalit, and that is a main concern for Israel. At the same time, though, you can't allow what's happening to continue. And Gilad Shalit is a painful, it's horrible. I mean, don't get me wrong, horrible what's happened. Israel needs to come up with a real strategy how to deal and what to do in the case or the event of a kidnapped soldier. The Americans had a policy that started with the Afghanistan war as well as with the Iraq war, that they do not conduct negotiations with terrorists to obtain the release of soldiers, and that saw the decline and drop in attempts by terrorists to kidnap soldiers. And Israel today does not have a clear policy, and they know that that is where Israel is most vulnerable, and they continue to hit us there. Just recently, a Palestinian guy from Rafah, the southern town in Gaza, was caught as he tried to infiltrate into Israel via the Egyptian border. And he told his Shin Bet interrogators that he crossed into Egypt through a tunnel under the border with Gaza, had drugs with him. He was supposed to lure Israeli soldiers to the border to entice them to participate in a drug deal. He was going to sedate them, smuggle them into Egypt, then into Gaza via one of the tunnels, and they were going to use them as bargaining chips. So that, on that note, I can just say that Israel does need to come up with a better policy of how it deals with the events of soldiers that are kidnapped. At the same time, Hamas is so difficult. I don't even know where to begin. But in short, the main issue today with regard to the situation in the Gaza Strip is you know how you get in, but you don't know how you get out. And you see America has the same problem in Iraq. Israel withdrew from Gaza, whether you like it or you don't, but with the full intention never to have to go back. And today, with the thousands of rockets that have been fired since 2005 and the close to 80 just this past week, the possibility of a military operation is becoming real again. Now, some people say you have to go in, you have to cut up Gaza, split into three, go house to house, door to door, kill terrorists, destroy infrastructure, and wipe out Hamas. First of all, that's a little lofty because I don't think we can eradicate Hamas. We didn't succeed in eradicating Hezbollah. We can definitely weaken Hamas. But even if we do, what happens next, right? Do you pull out? Do you create a vacuum again? Who fills the vacuum? It's not going to be some good guy because that never happens. And Abbas doesn't have the political clout to take over the West Bank, the Gaza Strip. He can barely hold on to the West Bank. So what do you do, right? So that just shows that's why I say Hamas is very, very. The Gaza Strip today is a very complicated reality. Yes, sir.
Are there any signs at all right now in Iran where the younger population is starting to be heard like they were a few years ago? There was a lot of hope that they would start to put some pressure on the rulers and some of the administration. Has that completely died out? Is there some indications that we're starting again?
Right. Did everyone hear the question? Look, I mentioned before, the Islamic Revolution in 79 promised this prosperity that never happened. Instead, you got runaway inflation, high unemployment. When Ahmadinejad recently came to Tehran University, there was a videotape that was put out, and they tried not to try to prevent it from getting out, which showed students in the crowd chanting death to Ahmadinejad. Right? There's growing discontent. You have a high percentage of people, youth, who pursue a higher education, but can't get jobs, can't get small loans to open businesses. The drop in oil is going to have a major impact on the Iranian economy. And I've met with Iranians, most recently at a conference in Greece that I attended, a regional security conference, who told me, you wait 2 to 3 years, Iran will once again be Israel's best friend, because they were good friends under the Shah. Israel, here's a funny story, there's an Israeli company called Sultan, which makes mortars, and before the Shah fell, Israel sold mortars to Iran. Israel was supposed to sell long-range ballistic missiles to Iran, so I always say, thank God the revolution happened in 79, because otherwise they'd have Israeli missiles to threaten us with. But ultimately, the mortars that were sold to Iran in the 70s shows you how things come around, go around, is that they were then used by Hezbollah in the 2006 Lebanon war. So what I loved was when someone said to me the other day, I spoke at a church, a Methodist church up in San Francisco, and a woman said to me, Yaakov, you said great things, but you got to move on. America has moved on. Your term, the axes of evil, is part of the Bush doctrine. It's no longer relevant. And I said to her, when I use the term axes of evil, I don't refer to Bush. I refer to the axes of evil that we see in Israel alive and well every day. And I gave her this as an example. When you see that missiles, anti-tank missiles bought by Syria, and then from Russia and then used by Hezbollah against Israel, that really is a live, well, and healthy axis of evil that Israel faces off against the Middle East. With regard to your question, though, Israel has always said, and President Perez says it all the time, that Israel's conflict is not with the Iranian people. Right? They have a strong connection and relationship dating back thousands of years, but with the regime that they have in charge of them. And unfortunately, the way it seems today is they have a tight grip on the people. And even if there were to be a regime change, some people say, well, sooner or later it will happen. Do we have time to wait? I mean, that's the ultimate question.
It will happen at the same time as the nuclear sites are taken out. Then the people will overthrow the evil regime. That's some of the studies that show.
Possibly. Yeah.
Is there any evidence that the Arab states acquired nuclear weapons from the former Soviet Union?
There's always been a concern for Israel, the possibility that terrorist organizations would get their hands on nuclear weapons. I personally don't know of that happening. Pakistan has become a real concern as well as for Israel, even though Pakistan is far away, but considering that it's a state that has a growing radical Islamic group on the ground and already has nuclear weapons, you really have to watch over it very carefully. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
With the economic crisis in America and the need for help, I've read that some of the Arab, like Saudi Arabia, could perhaps help us, and in that way we would have Sharia law. And what would we do about that?
I don't know. You may have to walk around with a headscarf. I mean, I don't. I mean, ultimately, with the economic crisis, I think maybe you could look at it differently. There's concern today within Israel is that the $3 billion that Israel receives in foreign military aid may come under scrutiny now that there is the economic crisis. Should America be giving Israel $3 billion when you have people in the middle of America who don't have jobs, can't pay mortgages, can't put food on their plate? And I have no doubt that maybe it's not in Obama's head, but there are people around Obama, like any president it would be, even if it was McCain, who would be saying and questioning whether we should continue to give, maybe we should cut the aid in half, take a little off. Now Israel needs that money, and that's a big deal. Yes? Yeah?
Talk more about Russia's role in this conflict, as well as what would be the way that countries like Germany and Austria cut their financial connection with Iran.
Well, everyone heard the question about Russia. Sorry. The question was a little more about Russia's role. A little more about Russia's role in the region, and how also China and Germany also continue. Okay, so Germany and France and Germany, Austria, Italy continue to do business with Iran by the billions of dollars. At the same time, I did mention that Germany is building us submarines, gave us submarines, and is a strong ally for Israel in the EU. With that said, with regard to Russia, I mean, it's not me who's saying this, but there are people who are raising the possibility that we're on the verge of a second Cold War following the war in Georgia over the summer. There's a growing Russian power today in the world. And when that plays itself out, it plays out in the Middle East. And you have today, I mentioned the $50 billion that America's selling to the Middle East. So Russia has a defense industry. It's also very hungry that it needs to feed. And they're also looking to sell. And where do they sell to? So they sell to Syria, they sell to Iran. What's on the table right now is the possible sale of what's called the S-300, one of the most advanced anti-aircraft missile defense systems in the world. Can engage 12 targets at once from hundreds of miles away and thousands of feet altitude. Be a real threat for any American or Israeli strike against Iran. That's where Prime Minister Olmert's visit came to Medvedev, the new president, just last month. Besides that, though, Russia is also establishing a new military presence in the Middle East. They built up the Tartus naval base in Syria. There was a report recently about possible military presence in Libya as well. That's where Russia plays a very dangerous role. Just to conclude, with regard to the other countries, what we've seen until now is that China, Russia have been opposed to major sanctions on Iran. Now, some people will tell you, and maybe it'll work, I don't know, but that a dialogue with Iran today would show you that, would show the world that America has tried this other course of action, this other avenue, not just military action, but also a dialogue, and that it hasn't worked. And that would be one way to enlist these other countries that until now have been opposed to sanctions to get onto your team. And that's why the Obama supporters, those people will tell you that that's why that's important. I can't tell you what will happen. I'm skeptical of that working. Yeah.
No matter who's been president for the last 60 years, Israel's strongest defenders in the United States have always come from Congress and the Senate. So independent of what's going to happen to Mr. Obama, how is Israel doing with maintaining power bases, lobbying in Congress and Senate? Because American Muslims are becoming increasingly active in using lobbying and congressional connections. So how do you?
I mean, I think still AIPAC is probably the one of the more powerful than the Arab lobby. At the same time, I personally believe that Israel's strategic relationship with the United States is deeply rooted in the Congress and the Senate, is not just in the White House. And for that reason, even if you have an Obama presidency, which is, I wouldn't necessarily say hostile, but is not overly friendly to Israel, then you still have the Senate and the Congress, and even if they want to cut foreign military aid, it would have to pass through there. And there are people who would tell you that it's skeptical that they would succeed in that passing. Israel certainly needs to work on maintaining a good relationship with the Obama presidency, with the new administration, with the Congress, with the Senate, and that's not going to be an easy task, because ultimately what you do have is a new administration that you don't know, you're not very familiar with. Obama's a one-term senator, was in state senate. You don't necessarily know the guy. And you have to build up and create and forge that strong relationship for it to be there. You don't have that today. And that's why my recommendation to Israel at the moment would be to work on creating that relationship with the administration here, because you need a strong America on your side as your friend. Yeah. 2 more questions. Yes, you in the back.
Since you're in California, there's a very strong belief here that when you want something, rather than fighting what you don't want, you turn your attention to what you do want. So as a journalist, it would be wonderful if Israel could start making comments like, as soon as Jews feel as safe in Arab territories as Arabs feel in Israeli territories, then we can consider all borders. Common sense type statements that Israelis seem almost afraid to make, because they know that Arabs aren't going to live up to them. Arabs aren't going to live up to it anyway. At least make PR statements that will give you good PR that people can understand. The checkpoints will absolutely be dismantled as soon as bombs stop coming, as soon as suicide bombers stop coming across into Israel.
Right.
Use what you want.
So why doesn't Israel say that, is what you're asking?
Is there a possibility we can start using the God-given intellectual talents we have?
You know what? I mean, I don't know. But what I can tell you is, Israel's declared policy of a 2-state solution, an Israeli state and a Palestinian state, would have occurred already had the Palestinians not engaged in terrorism. Israel has showed over the years that its main objective is peace. Made peace with the Egyptians, made peace with the Jordanians, made peace with has been working to make peace with the Palestinians, disengaged from Gaza on a painful concession. No. What I'm saying is that ultimately that message is forgotten, though, on the outside, because people tend either to ignore it, or they don't know it, or they don't believe in it. And that's where you need to change the perception, is that's what Israel's ultimate goal is. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's funny. I've been talking to Doris about this in the past, just to follow up what that lady was saying. The question is, why is Israel's public relations so poor? You're just telling everybody here, we all know that. Why doesn't the Israeli Secretary of State sometimes stand up and say, as soon as Jews feel comfortable in the West Bank, as Arabs feel in Israel, there'll be peace? I mean, Americans could grasp that, and we never quite hear it. They seem to almost be closed-lipped, and it would be nice. There's a campaign now about saying shalom and come to Israel, one of these, almost like come stay with friends of some years back, which is lovely. It's lovely to see. It would be nice if they could throw in a little political, clever political things like that.
Israelis, us Jews are very smart, right, when it comes to high-tech agriculture and all this other stuff, and we failed at PR. I mean, unfortunately, there was a very bad mentality within Israel for many years that no matter what we do, we won't succeed. The world is against us. I personally don't believe in that. I think that we've made some tragic mistakes. One that sticks in my mind forever, because I was there to see it, was on July 30th, 2006, during the Second Lebanon War, when Israel bombed Kfar Kana, and accidentally, bombed out a building. Initial reports claim 60 people were killed. Al Jazeera was there, bodies being pulled out. It ended up to be about 28, 29 people. BBC, CNN, Sky News, Fox News, everybody was on the ground, connected to the live feed. The whole world's seeing this. Clearly Israel's in bad shape. Israeli spokespeople get on the air and say, we're sorry, we regret, but it's a war, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you can't, that doesn't have any effect against images. At 8 o'clock that night, 12 and a half hours after the bombing, because it happened at 7:30, Israel released a videotape showing rockets being fired from the building. It's 12 and a half hours too late. I mean, for God's sakes, what are you waiting for? Now, let's not forget what happened that day is that Condoleezza Rice was in Israel, was shutting the shuttle diplomacy, was supposed to move on to Beirut to meet with Fouad Signora. Signora said, don't bother coming, I got nothing to talk to you about after the Israelis just killed 29 people. Israel had to give in, she started to put the pressure on Olmert, and Olmert caved into a 48-hour suspension of aerial activity over Lebanon in the middle of a war. That's a high price to pay. I can't say that if we released the video earlier it would have changed anything, but it could have had an effect. And it was, and you know what the problem was? Because I looked into it. You had a general in the Air Force who said, what the hell do you want from me? I'm in the middle of fighting a war. This has got nothing to do with it. And unfortunately, he didn't understand that public diplomacy is part of the campaign, is part of the war. Now, hopefully that's changed. Today, I do think that we are starting to see a new understanding when it comes to Hasbara, when it comes to PR. You're not going to like what I'm about to say. But the Free Gaza movement, the boats that have been coming, and I think they're even based out of San Francisco, that there are 3 boats now that Israel has allowed into the Gaza Strip. Have you read about it? You heard about it? Yeah. Of course you have. Ultimately, though, most of the world hasn't heard about it. And you know why? Because Israel's decision to let them in has prevented what they're looking for, which is essentially the standoff at sea and to get the PR. Because imagine, if Israel didn't let them into Gaza, they'd stay out in the water, they wouldn't have, at sea, they wouldn't have water, they wouldn't have food, you'd have helicopters, you'd have the whole world media focusing on this stupid boat in the middle of the Mediterranean, and Israel would look horrible. And at least, so Israel, at the one hand, wants to maintain the blockade on Gaza, to prevent weapons from getting in. On the other hand, understands that if you don't let this boat in, you're going to look horrible out in the media in the world. So there is, thankfully, they're starting to understand that you can't just go with a military position. There always was, another example, there always was after suicide bombings, this tension between the foreign ministry and the defense ministry. The IDF had a suicide bombing in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, no matter where, wanted to respond immediately, bomb a place in Gaza. Right now, the foreign ministry said, if you bomb right now, tomorrow's newspapers, the LA Times, New York Times, around the world, are all going to be, what's the headline going to be? Israel kills 10 Palestinians. And then the third paragraph will be, the bombing in Gaza came in retaliation to the bus bombing, that is. But it's the third paragraph, who looks at it? So the foreign ministry would say, wait, hold 1 day so we can get the press. And the IDF would say, the military guys would say, no, we got to respond right away. There's the difficulty in understanding this is part of the war. This is the difficulty in creating a good strategy. You also have, let's not forget, and this I'll end, is that the political reality in Israel, when you have a coalition made up of different political parties with different ideologies and leaders such as Barak, Olmert, and Livni, who are all political rivals and probably don't like each other that much, and one is a prime minister, one is a defense minister, and one is a foreign minister. When you want to create a unified message of what Israel should be getting out to the world, how do you do that when you have 3 people who probably can't sit in the room for more than 10 minutes together? Right? So that political reality of not having stability, our country has not had a government since 1992 that has finished a complete term in office. Right? With that note, I thank you all very much. I thank Doris.